In the 60s, I think the funny thing is, fashion, when you think about it, when I was a kid, my favorite thing in the world to do was go shopping. But there weren't a lot of labels. So when I was little, I didn't know that there were designers behind all of these fabulous brands that you saw. And then suddenly, you started to see these labels emerge and that there was a person. So you saw the emergence of the American designer. So I think the 60s really sort of brought the attention to the designer at last. What do I remember about the 70s? Well, I was a student at FIT in the 70s. What do I remember? I remember that I liked going to Studio 54 rather than my draping classes. I think it's really that moment in American fashion and in general where all the rules just disappeared. And I think creativity just flourishes in a time like that. It was an amazing moment here. Well, when you think about nightclubbing and discos and Studio 54, you think to yourself, when I first started designing clothes, you could come up with the craziest thing in the world, and if someone said, well, where would you wear that? You could say, well, I'd wear it to 54. Again, it relaxed the rules, I think it made designers really creative. There were less structures that you had to deal with. HALSTON was this rare combination of a designer who I think totally respected women, whether they were Kay Graham or Liza Minnelli or Bianca Jagger. He knew how to frame the woman. I think that he also, in a totally American way, it was the first time you saw such luxury in a relaxed sort of way, that it could be really like a sweatsuit. But it was cashmere, and she had a sexy shoe on. And I think that it was so American in the fact that as glamorous as it was, everything that he touched still had a utilitarian sort of edge to it, which could only have happened here. I think that designer as a brand, I think, well, of course, the greatest American designer of all times to me is Levi Strauss. It's the one garment that I don't think there's a designer on the planet didn't wish that they designed that perfect 501 jean. So it started then, but I think it kept, sort of evolving. I think HALSTON certainly came on the scene. I moved into the FIT dorms with my HALSTON luggage, and he permeated your lifestyle. I mean, I was 16 years old and I had my Bill Blass sheets, my HALSTON luggage, my goggles from Calvin. I was doing the whole 9 yards. And I think that, again, the 70s it started to happen. And I think a lot of that has to do with designers becoming involved with things other than just clothing. Getting involved with things that were in your house. You lived with these designers and they lived with you. So suddenly, they were like family. It was like someone who became a part of your life. Well, I think in the 80s, I started my business, and I was definitely the fish swimming against the stream, because I think the 80s were about everything being too big. Your shoulders were too big, your hair was too big, your jewelry was too big, your belt was too wide. I think it was just about too much of everything. You suddenly had a whole new market. And it really brought such energy to the fashion business, and of course a lot of business also. And suddenly you had a woman who was affluent, but she was getting on a plane, running in and out of a car. She needed to be able to move, and she felt good about herself even when she was over 30. And I think that changed everything. I think that at the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s, everyone suddenly felt terribly guilty. Like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? Why was I wearing lime green, crunched ankle boots and a fringed jumpsuit and a white leather bomber jacket? So we went the opposite. And, suddenly things like Quakers and the Amish and Seattle became important words in fashion. And I think we were sort of paying for our sins of the 80s reality now when I look back. And perhaps we zigged too far. We took all the pleasure out of fashion, but that's the fun thing about fashion, it's always changing. I think that, each each fashion capital in the world has always sort of represented something. You know, New York is pragmatic. France is all about indulgence. Italy is about this incredible fabric and tailoring. The English have great wit. The Japanese, avant-garde. The Belgians with their own sort of quirky point of view. I think now everyone is learning that we can all sort of take the best of all of these places and meld it into one international way of looking at fashion. The best clothes embrace all of that today. I have totally ridden the roller coaster of fashion, and I think fashion never stops being a roller coaster. I think the most important thing is tenacious, tenacious, tenacious. Have a point of view, and you've got to really love it. You know, anyone who says, well, I'm thinking of becoming a designer. Well, you don't think of becoming a designer. You know, this is a calling, something you have to do. You've got to do. And you've got to have a really sort of sharp, curious mind. You've always got to be ready for something new, because people are always changing, so therefore fashion's always going to change. And I think that, you know, tenacious and curiosity, those are the two things that I think that any designer needs.